Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Prophet Samuel 1, chapter 13, in a clear and simple way, step by step. Okay, let's dive right into this. Just imagine for a second that you're a newly appointed king. You're trying your best to unite this really fragile, brand new nation, but suddenly, you are staring down an absolute war machine of an enemy army, and the kicker? You have virtually no weapons of your own. Every single second counts. Your men are literally fleeing in terror, and the one person who is supposed to show up and guide you through this is late. So what do? Well, today we're going to look at a young King Saul facing these exact impossible odds. We're going to see the immense pressure he's under, the agonizingly slow ticking clock, and that one critical, impatient mistake that ultimately costs him his entire dynasty. So to really understand how things get to such a desperate breaking point, let's look at the very beginning of the chapter, specifically verses 1 and 2. Saul's reign has officially kicked off. The text notes he's been reigning for 2 years over Israel. At this point, he decides, okay, it's time to build a standing army. But it is a very, very small one. He chooses just 3,000 men from all of Israel. And notice how he strategically divides this tiny force. He keeps 2,000 men right there with himself in Michmas and the hill country of Bethel, and he gives the remaining 1,000 to his son, Jonathan, stationing them in Gibeah of Benjamin. Everyone else, sent home. Saul is basically just setting up some basic defensive positions, but man, things are about to escalate so quickly. Let's move along to verses 3 and 4 and see how this conflict really sparks. Saul's son, Jonathan, decides to make an incredibly bold move. He attacks and smites the Philistine garrison located over in Geba. Now, this is a massive provocation. You have to remember, the Philistines were the absolute regional superpower at the time, and Israel just walked right up and poked the bear. Obviously, the Philistines hear about it immediately, and in response, Saul knows full-scale war is absolutely unavoidable now. So he blows the horn, the shofar, throughout the entire land, declaring, "Let the Hebrews hear." The urgent message goes out that Saul has smitten the Philistine garrison, and that Israel has basically become entirely hateful to the Philistines. Because of this massive impending threat, the Israelites are frantically summoned to gather behind Saul at a place called Gilgal. But listen, the Philistines do not take this lightly at all. In verse 5, we get a look at the truly terrifying scale of their retaliation. 30,000. The Philistines assemble to fight Israel with 30,000 chariots. And if that wasn't enough, add 6,000 horsemen to the mix, plus foot soldiers described as being as numerous as the sand on the seashore. It's a staggering force. They march right up and pitch their camp in Michmas. Try to think about this from the Israelites' perspective for a second. They're this loosely connected, rural group of tribes with a brand new king, and they're suddenly standing face to face with a highly organized, massively equipped imperial army. So how does this newly formed, tiny Israelite army react? Well, verses 6 and 7 paint a picture of absolute, unadulterated terror. When the men of Israel see the sheer size of these Philistine forces, it hits them that their situation is completely desperate. The text says the people are distressed, and this detail just brilliantly illustrates their panic. They completely break rank and run for their lives. They literally hide wherever they possibly can. The text lists them fleeing into caves, thickets, rocks, holds, and even pits in the ground. Some of the Hebrews are so terrified they actually cross the Jordan River to escape entirely to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for King Saul, he stays put at Gilgal, but the text tells us that all the people who did stay with him followed him trembling. And this brings us to the real emotional core of the chapter in verse 8. Saul is stuck at Gilgal, surrounded by a terrified, rapidly shrinking army. He has strict instructions from the prophet Samuel to wait for him there. Samuel had set a very specific appointed time of 7 days. So Saul waits. Day 1 goes by, day 2, day 3, all the way to day 7. And every single day, Saul has to stand there and watch more and more of his own men scatter from him out of pure fear. Finally, the deadline of the 7th day arrives, but Samuel doesn't show up. He does not come to Gilgal. The psychological pressure on Saul at this exact moment must have been unimaginable. Under this totally crushing pressure, Saul makes a really fateful decision in verse 9. He commands his men, "Bring hither to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings." And then he just goes ahead and offers the burnt offering himself. Now, let's clarify this real quick. An olah, or a burnt offering, is a complete animal sacrifice offered on an altar to God. It was a deeply crucial ritual to ask for God's favor right before a battle. But here is the absolute critical point. Saul is the king, right? He's not a priest, and he's not a prophet.
He was explicitly told to wait for Samuel to perform this exact ritual. But his impatience, and frankly, his sheer panic, drive him to cross a strict boundary he was never supposed to cross. And guys, here's where the tragedy of the situation really just hits you. Verse 10 reveals the heartbreaking timing of how this all went down. It comes to pass that the very moment, literally as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel arrives. It's just a devastating collision of timing. Saul finishes this unauthorized sacrifice, and seconds later, Samuel walks right into the camp. Saul goes out to meet him and salute him, probably hoping Samuel's going to understand or maybe validate why he just did what he did. But Samuel? Yeah, he is not pleased at all. In verses 11 and 12, Samuel asks a really piercing, direct question. What hast thou done? Saul immediately launches into this desperate defense. He tries to explain his logic step by step. He says, look, first, I saw the people were scattering from me. Second, you didn't come within the days appointed. And third, this massive Philistine army is actively assembling at Michmash. Saul explains his sheer panic to the prophet. He says he thought the Philistines were going to march down and attack him right there at Gilgal before he had even entreated the favor of the Lord. Therefore, Saul says, I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. He basically admits he knew it wasn't his place, but he let his fear dictate his actions anyway. Samuel's response in verse 13 is absolute, and it is devastating. He says, thou hast done foolishly. No sugarcoating it. Samuel explains exactly why. Saul has not kept the commandment of the Lord his God. You see, this wasn't just some minor procedural error, it was a fundamental failure of obedience to the clear, specific instructions given to him as the leader of Israel. Samuel then reveals the ultimate cost of this impatience. He tells Saul point blank that if he had just obeyed, the Lord would have established his kingdom upon Israel forever. Verse 14 delivers the final, incredibly heavy consequence. The text plainly states, but now thy kingdom shall not continue. Saul gets to remain king for the time being, but his dynasty, it's over. His sons will not inherit the throne after him. Samuel informs him that the Lord has already sought out a man after his own heart and has officially appointed this new man to be the prince over his people. And why did all this happen? Simply because Saul did not keep that which the Lord commanded him. It is a stark, sobering reminder of the exactness expected from Israel's leaders. Following this devastating news, we read in verses 15 and 16 that Samuel just rises and leaves Gilgal, heading over to Gibeath Benjamin. Saul is left standing there to take stock of his grim situation. He numbers the people that are still actually present with him. Remember that tiny army of 3,000 he started with? He is now down to exactly 600. So Saul, his son Jonathan, and a mere 600 remaining men take up their position in Gibeath Benjamin, while that massive, overwhelming Philistine army remains encamped right across the way in Michmash. With Israel now severely weakened, the Philistines begin to really exert their dominance over the land. Verses 17 and 18 describe the strategic reality of what happens next. Spoilers, which are essentially raiding parties, come out of the Philistine camp in 3 distinct companies. They spread out in 3 different directions to just terrorize the countryside. One company turns toward Ophrah in the land of Shul, another turns toward Beth-horon, and the third heads toward the border that looks down upon the valley of Zeboim toward the wilderness. The Philistines are just systematically plundering the Israelites. Now we arrive at verse 19, which drops this shocking detail about the technological disadvantage the Israelites are facing. The text tells us that there was no sharash, absolutely no blacksmith or metalworker found throughout all the land of Israel. Why? Because the Philistines strictly forbade it. The Philistines literally said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. They had established a complete, absolute monopoly on ironworking. This brilliantly illustrates how the Philistines controlled the Israelites. It wasn't just with sheer numbers, but by intentionally denying them the ability to manufacture any weapons of war whatsoever. Because of this strict ban, verse 20 explains a deeply humiliating reality for the Hebrews. All the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines just to sharpen their everyday agricultural tools. We're talking about basic farming equipment here: plowshares, coulters, axes, and mattocks. If a Hebrew farmer's tools got dull from working the rocky soil, he couldn't fix it himself. There was no local blacksmith to help him out. He literally had to travel to the enemy camps, swallow his pride, and pay the Philistines to sharpen the very tools he needed just to feed his family. Talk about adding insult to injury. And of course, the Philistines made sure this was expensive. Verse 21 gives us the exact price of this extortion. The price of the filing was a pim. Now, a pim was a specific weight of silver, which comes out to about 2/3 of a shekel. They charged this heavy fee for sharpening the mattocks, the coulters, the forks, the axes, and even to just set the goads they used for prodding livestock. It was a heavy, calculated economic burden placed squarely on the Israelites, designed to keep them poor and entirely dependent on their oppressors. This brings us to verse 22, which honestly paints one of the most remarkable and desperate pictures in the entire chapter. When the day of battle finally arrives, look at what we see. Out of the 600 common soldiers remaining with Saul and Jonathan, there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people. Let that sink in. None of them had actual weapons. But, the text notes, with King Saul and with Jonathan his son, swords were found. So only the royal family was properly armed. The rest of the army? They were likely just holding whatever sharpened farming tools they could muster up. Finally, verse 23 concludes this chapter's step-by-step walkthrough by perfectly setting the stage for what comes next. It simply states, "And the garrison of the Philistines went out unto the pass of Michmash." The enemy is actively mobilizing, moving right into a strategic choke point. The trap is completely set, the data lines are drawn, and the stage is perfectly prepared for the massive conflict that's going to unfold in chapter 14.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's synthesize the literal events we just covered into our first key idea, the trap of impatience. Saul was in a nearly impossible situation, no doubt about it. The pressure was immense. The sheer terror of his soldiers was contagious, and that clock was ticking down. Everything in his logical human mind told him he had to act immediately to save his people. But allowing that immense pressure to take over led to a critical lack of patience. He let his terrifying circumstances dictate his actions, rather than trusting the timeline he was given. And that leads us directly to the second key idea based purely on the Peshat, the simple literal text: obedience under pressure. The text makes it incredibly clear that following given instructions precisely is strictly important. It doesn't matter if the circumstances seem completely desperate. It doesn't matter if seemingly logical alternatives present themselves, like Saul deciding, "Hey, I'll just do the offering myself since Samuel's late." True obedience isn't tested when things are calm and easy. It's tested when everything is falling apart around you and you are so tempted to just take matters into your own hands. Now, how do we actually apply this? Let's pivot to a practical life lesson. How do we handle the pressure of waiting? In our own lives, we so often face moments where we feel totally abandoned, or our carefully laid plans are agonizingly delayed. The pressure mounts, and the temptation to act impulsively, to force ourselves into a sudden decision just to relieve the anxiety, is incredibly strong. Saul's story asks us to take a hard look at our own reactions when our backs are pushed right up against the wall. The practical lesson here is that we have to trust the process. We have to learn to control our anxiety. When we are given specific rules, boundaries, or a designated process to follow, we need to trust in that, rather than forcing outcomes out of fear. Saul panicked. He forced an outcome, and it literally cost him his legacy. Trusting the process means holding the line, even when the people around you are scattering. Knowing deep down that impulsive actions taken in fear usually just lead to long-term regrets. All right, let's bring this all together real quick with a deliberate recap of the chapter to make sure we've solidly grasped the events. First, the threat. Jonathan attacks a garrison, sparking a massive Philistine retaliation of 30,000 chariots, causing Israel to panic and hide. Second, the wait. Saul waits 7 agonizing days at Gilgal for Samuel while his army scatters. Third, the mistake. Under immense pressure, Saul impatiently offers the burnt offering himself right before Samuel finally arrives. Fourth, the consequence. Samuel sternly rebukes Saul, declaring his dynasty is finished and God has sought a new man. And finally, the disadvantage. Saul is left with just 600 unarmed men facing 3 raiding parties and a total Philistine monopoly on ironworking. So Saul has lost his legacy, and his 600 unarmed men are now marching toward a highly advanced, fully equipped enemy. Will Jonathan's bravery or Saul's impatience define Israel's future? We'll find out soon. Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.